A young nurse got humiliated for her scars at the airport, not until the five-star general walked in and recognized her unit tattoo. The morning was still fresh when Lisa arrived at the airport, completely unaware of what was about to happen to her. She had been granted a 1-week leave from the hospital, a much-needed break after months of non-stop trauma work. She planned to surprise her family. It had been too long since she laughed around a dinner table instead of counting heartbeats in the back of an ambulance. She entered the airport alone, rolling her modest carry-on behind her. Clad in blue scrubs, Lisa didn't bother changing into civilian clothes. She never felt the need to blend in or hide who she was. Not anymore. The scar on her face was unmistakable, an uneven, pale pink line that ran from her left eyebrow down to the curve of her cheekbone. Faint now, but impossible to miss. It had healed, but not enough to be forgotten. Nor did she want it to be. Her right hand bore a different kind of mark, a small, neat tattoo of a falcon clutching a caduceus, the emblem of the falcon unit she had served with during the Caboose mission. People noticed her as soon as she stepped into the security line. Some glanced and quickly looked away. Others stared longer, not knowing whether to pity her, judge her, or simply gawk. Lisa was used to it. She stood quietly, holding her boarding pass in one hand, the other loosely resting by her side where the tattoo showed against her fair skin. A young boy ahead of her turned and stared. Lisa smiled gently. He didn't smile back. His mother leaned down and whispered something in his ear, just loud enough for Lisa to catch. "Don't look, baby. She probably got into something bad." Lisa's lips pressed into a thin line. It wasn't the first time someone assumed the worst. It wouldn't be the last. The line crept forward. The TSA officer at the front, a square-shouldered man in his 40s, looked up from his screen as she approached. His eyes landed on the scarf first, then traveled down to her scrubs, then the tattoo. "Name?" he asked, voice flat. "Lisa Hammond." He scanned the boarding pass, then stared at her face for a beat too long. "What happened to you?" he asked casually, like someone might ask about the weather. Lisa met his gaze without blinking. "I was injured during a medevac mission." "Caboose." He raised his brows, clearly unfamiliar with the name. "You military?" "Nurse." His lip curled into a smirk. "Right. War nurse. Didn't think that was still a thing." Lisa didn't respond. She had been trained to keep calm under pressure, whether under rocket fire or under the judgmental stares of ignorant strangers. The line behind her kept shifting, but Lisa stood still, her boarding pass clutched gently in her hand. The blue scrubs she wore were clean, though the morning bustle had already left sweat at the base of her neck. She had just passed through the initial ID checkpoint, and now all that stood between her and her gate was the scanner. But behind her, whispers stirred like wind in dry leaves. "She's probably on something," a man muttered under his breath. Lisa heard it, loud enough to sting. A woman replied softly, "That has to be a drug burn. Or self-inflicted. Who comes to the airport looking like that?" Lisa didn't turn around. Her jaw flexed. Her fingers closed tighter around the boarding pass, crumpling one corner. She stood taller, straightened her shoulders, and kept moving toward the scanner like none of it touched her. But it had. Their words sliced deeper than they could ever understand. Not because they saw the scar. She was long past hiding it. No, it was the assumption. The careless conclusion that pain must come from shameful choices. That the damage they saw had been deserved. Her scar was a winding trail of healed flame down the left side of her face, uneven, textured, and permanent. Some days it felt like a brand. Other days, like armor. But here, in a terminal filled with well-dressed strangers and impatient TSA agents, it became something else entirely. A trigger. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. Flash. The memory hit her uninvited. Caboose. A dry, smoke-choked valley. Fire everywhere. A convoy in ruins. And screaming. The world had turned red that day, fire licking the metal edges of an overturned transport. The back door had jammed. Inside, 2 Marines bled out while another screamed for help. She remembered crawling through broken glass and metal. She remembered the searing pain across her face when the second explosion blew just yards away. And she remembered the boy. 17. No legs. Eyes wide as dinner plates. Crying for his mom. She had dragged him out under fire. Shielded his body with hers while calling for medevac over a cracked comm her own skin burned. Her vision blurry. It was the moment her life split in two. And now someone in an airport called it a drug burn. Lisa clenched her fists, forcing herself not to speak. The child inside her wanted to scream. The woman she'd become knew better. She bit her lip and breathed deeply. The security scanner beeped once, then twice, before the agent waved her forward. Just as she stepped inside the glass pod, another voice floated behind her. Low, speculative, probably mental. They let people like that fly. Lisa closed her eyes as the scanner doors closed around her. She was surrounded by light, by silence, and by memory. She could still feel the weight of the boy's body in her arms. Could still smell the diesel smoke and charred leather from the wreckage. Could still taste ash on her tongue. No one in that airport had seen what she'd seen. They didn't know what it took to run toward burning metal instead of away from it. They didn't know that her hands had once closed over a severed artery while bullets snapped overhead. To them, she was just damaged. Just a woman in scrubs with a scarred face and a military tattoo. The scanner hummed around her, mechanically cold. When the glass doors opened, Lisa stepped out. But before she could gather her things, a new figure stepped into her path. A security supervisor in a dark uniform. Tall, barrel-chested, and holding her ID in one hand. "Miss Hammond," he said. "Need a word." She didn't flinch. "Is there a problem?" He studied her face a moment longer than necessary. His eyes danced between her scar and the Falcon unit tattoo on her right hand. "Where are you flying to?" he asked, tone polite but suspicious. "Charlotte," she replied evenly. He looked back down at her ID, then back at her. "Traveling for medical reasons?" Lisa's brow furrowed. "I'm a trauma nurse. I just got a week off. I'm going home." The supervisor's lips pressed into a line. "You served?" Lisa said nothing at first. Then she nodded once. "Kabusa, Falcon unit. I was their medic." His expression flickered, but only for a second. He still didn't look convinced. Or maybe he didn't care. "Just a random check," he said stiffly, and handed her ID back. Lisa took it without a word. Her hands were steady, but her chest felt tight. The weight of suspicion clung to her like airport humidity. She moved past him to retrieve her bag from the conveyor. Voices murmured behind her still, just out of earshot now, but she didn't need to hear the words. The tone was enough. No one had seen what she did in Kabusa. They only saw the result. The scar. The silent weight she carried. And in that sterile security zone full of luggage and routine checks, Lisa, who had once been called a hero, felt more like a cautionary tale. She pressed her palm over her tattoo. It grounded her. The whispers continued as she walked away. She must have done something to deserve that. Poor thing. Probably a vet gone off the rails. She looked unstable. Lisa never turned back. They didn't know. And for now, that was fine. But they would. One day, someone would recognize that tattoo. And when that day came, the whispers would stop. She stood still. Lisa had just finished answering a string of unnecessary questions from the security supervisor. He still held her ID, staring at it like it might change shape if he squinted hard enough. People nearby tried to look casual as they watched the scene unfold. Someone had pulled out a phone. Someone else whispered to a companion, eyes flicking from Lisa's face to the tattoo on her wrist. Lisa was used to attention, but not this kind. Not this kind of hush, not the kind that turns a scar into a warning label and a war tattoo into a police report. The terminal buzzed with the usual airport chaos, but around her, time felt slow. Air thick. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips, steady but alert. Her jaw ached from how tightly she clenched it. "Just a routine question," the security officer had said, but the way he looked at her said otherwise. And then, something shifted. The sound of polished boots echoed softly on the terminal floor. Not hurried, not hesitant, measured, purposeful, like each step knew exactly where it was going. The rhythm of the place changed. Conversations dulled. Heads turned. Phones lowered. Even the air seemed to straighten itself. From the far end of the terminal, he emerged. Tall, clean-cut, a posture carved from command. The shine of his boots caught the ceiling lights as he walked, each stride landing with effortless precision. His uniform was pressed, adorned with rows of medals that shimmered against deep army green. But it wasn't the uniform that turned heads. It was the weight of the man wearing it. 5 stars glinted across his chest. A rank almost mythical. General Thomas Brink. Those who knew, recognized instantly. Those who didn't, could feel it in their bones. Some people have gravity. This man had it in spades. He didn't speak, didn't nod. He simply walked, and the room seemed to part for him. Lisa noticed the shift before she saw him. That quiet in a room that should be buzzing. Then the eyes. People weren't staring at her anymore. They were looking past her, She turned, following the invisible thread in the air. And there he was. General Briggs' eyes swept the room as if he was scanning for intel. Not rushed, not distracted, until they landed on her. And stayed. His gaze flicked to the scar on her face, then to the unmistakable Falcon unit tattoo on her wrist, partially hidden by her boarding pass. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Recognition settled on his face like dawn breaking over the horizon. Lisa swallowed. General Briggs' expression didn't change much, but something shifted in the set of his jaw, in the narrowing of his eyes. A quiet familiarity, a hint of memory. He changed direction and began walking straight toward her. The security supervisor noticed, stiffening instinctively. The man tried to mask it with professional calm, but his eyes grew wide as the general closed in. Lisa held her breath. The sound of Briggs' boots grew louder, sharp, clear, unbothered by the tiles beneath them. As he drew closer, the room's attention converged entirely. People didn't dare whisper now. Some stood straighter, like they owed the man a salute even if they weren't in uniform. Others moved aside without being asked. Lisa's fingers trembled ever so slightly, though her stance didn't shift. She didn't look away. She hadn't seen General Briggs in years. Not since the final medevac out of Kabusa. Not since she'd handed over 2 of his wounded men and collapsed beside the aircraft, bloodied and burned. They'd never spoken, but she knew who he was, and somehow he hadn't forgotten her. He stopped just 3 steps in front of her. Not rushed, not dramatic, just present. The security supervisor cleared his throat. "Sir, is there?" The general lifted one finger. The man shut his mouth. Briggs turned his full attention to Lisa. His eyes dropped briefly to her hand again, to the faded ink of the Falcon unit Falcon, then back to her face. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. Not with pity, not with concern, with recognition. Then, softly, he spoke. "Falcon unit?" Lisa nodded. Her voice caught slightly before she found it. "Yes, sir." His gaze didn't waver. "Kabusa?" "Yes, sir." A subtle breath left his nose, barely audible. Not quite a sigh, more like memory surfacing through the calm. "You carried Sergeant Niels out of a burning vehicle," he said. "And Corporal Brenner. Under fire. No cover." Lisa said nothing. The memory of it was etched deep. The heat, the metal, the blood, the boy with no legs who clung to her flak vest, the screams that never quite left her ears. The general spoke again. "You didn't have to go back in. The medevac was already en route." "I know," she said softly. He looked down, as if the floor itself carried the ghosts of that day. Then back at her. "You did it anyway." Lisa nodded once. They were still breathing. Around them, silence held. The terminal wasn't frozen, but it moved in a strange orbit now, revolving around the quiet gravity between them. The general turned toward the security supervisor. "This woman is not to be questioned again," he said, voice firm and absolute. "She's Falcon. She's one of ours." The supervisor's face lost color. He opened his mouth, but no words followed. He just nodded, stepping back awkwardly. Briggs looked back at Lisa. "We don't forget our own." Lisa felt something inside her chest unclench. It wasn't pride. It wasn't relief. It was the recognition. The simple, powerful acknowledgement that someone remembered, not just her scar, not just her tattoo, but her sacrifice. She stood taller, a steady. Briggs gave her a final nod. "I'll see you at the gate," he said. Then he turned, walking away with the same calm assurance that carried him in. But now, every eye in the room looked not at him, but at her. Lisa remained still, her fingers resting gently on the Falcon unit tattoo. And for the first time since Kabusa, she felt seen. The hush was absolute. General Briggs came to a stop beside Lisa, his presence drawing in every wandering gaze like gravity itself. The TSA officer, still holding Lisa's ID and brimming with misplaced authority, opened his mouth to speak, but the general raised his hand. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't have to. "Is that the Falcon unit tattoo?" His voice was low but unmistakable, calm, even, with just enough weight to hush the air around them. Lisa looked up. For a moment, the world seemed to collapse into silence. Her fingers curled slightly, brushing the small falcon inked into her skin just above her wrist. Her pulse thumped beneath it. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm rising in her chest. Briggs nodded, then turned. Not just to the officer, but to the entire crowd gathering with their stares and their assumptions. "This woman," he began, This nurse saved my men when no one else could. The room stilled. She didn't wait for orders. She didn't wait for backup. She went in alone. You could hear a zipper slide, a phone being lowered, the soft shuffle of someone standing straighter. She carried 2 Marines out of a burning vehicle in Kabusa under direct fire, the general said. One of them had lost both legs. She shielded his body with her own. He looked around, at the security officer, the whispering couple now frozen, the teenagers with lowered eyes. Those scars aren't a disgrace, he said, with full weight. They're a mark of courage, of sacrifice, of service most of us will never understand. The couple that had muttered about drug burns earlier glanced away. The man shifted uncomfortably. The woman clutched her purse and stared at the floor. Lisa stood motionless, her breath caught somewhere between pride and disbelief. No one had ever done this. No one had ever spoken her story aloud. And now, a 5-star general, someone who had seen her at her lowest, burned and bruised, covered in dust and blood, was saying the words out loud in a place full of strangers who had judged her without knowing her. Lisa's lips trembled. She fought the rising emotion, the heat behind her eyes. But for once, the tears weren't from shame. They were from being seen. General Brigg turned back to her, not saying anything more, just giving a slow, respectful nod, one soldier to another. And in that moment, Lisa didn't feel small. She didn't feel scarred or out of place. She felt honored. For the first time in a long time, she belonged. For a moment, no one moved. The words spoken by General Brigg still hung in the air, bold and unshakable, settling into every corner of the terminal. His voice hadn't been loud, but its impact echoed through the room like thunder after a flash of lightning. Lisa stood rooted in place, her face still, but her eyes betrayed the emotion rising inside her. The Falcon unit tattoo on her wrist remained visible, steady as her breath trembled beneath her ribs. She hadn't asked for the spotlight, but it found her anyway, not from scandal or suspicion, but from truth. And the room began to change. A TSA officer, the same one who had scoffed earlier at her scars, took a step forward. His face had lost its stiffness, replaced by something quieter, regret, maybe. He cleared his throat, not meeting her eyes at first. "I apologize, ma'am," he said softly. "I didn't know." Lisa nodded once, gracious but guarded. She'd never needed their validation, but she'd never expected it either. Across the room, a woman, middle-aged, expensive scarf around her neck, lipstick too perfect, raised a hand slowly to her face and dabbed at the corner of her eye with a tissue. She looked directly at Lisa and mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Even the teenagers who had smirked and filmed earlier stood awkwardly near the edge of the terminal, their phones forgotten, their postures hunched. One of them looked like he wanted to say something. He didn't. The murmurs that had once mocked Lisa's face now turned into whispers of respect. She was Falcon Unit? Kabusa, that's real. She saved lives. Not far off, a young man in jeans and a hoodie stood near the seating area. Clean-shaven, buzz-cut. His eyes locked on Lisa as if searching for confirmation. Then, quietly, he lifted his right hand in a salute. Lisa recognized the stance instantly. Military. A Marine. She returned a small nod. The Marine dropped his salute and stood tall, his expression unreadable, but his respect clear. Lisa's throat tightened. She hadn't expected the sudden warmth in her chest. For so long, her scars had been a conversation ender, a reason to avert eyes. She had walked through grocery stores, elevators, waiting rooms, and yes, airports, while people looked through her or around her, judging what they couldn't understand. But now, they were seeing. General Brigg turned to her again. He was still standing beside her like an anchor in the room. He looked her square in the eye and said, "People forget that heroes don't always wear medals." A pause. "Sometimes they wear scars." Lisa blinked rapidly, but not in shame. These weren't the tears she swallowed back during mockery, or the ones she buried deep in hospital bathrooms between surgeries. These were tears that welled from recognition, from truth finally spoken. Her breath left her slowly, an exhale that felt like it had been waiting years to come out. Around her, silence settled, not heavy, but reverent. It was then that an airline employee stepped forward. A young woman in a crisp uniform, tablet in hand. She approached Lisa hesitantly, then offered a gentle smile. "Ms. Hammond," she said quietly, "we'd like to offer you an upgrade to first class. Courtesy of the airline." Lisa's brow lifted. She opened her mouth to object, out of habit. But before she could speak, the woman added, "No cost." Just respect. Lisa took the new boarding pass without a word. Her hands trembled slightly as her fingers brushed the paper. First class. Around her, the crowd shifted again, not physically, but emotionally. The stares had changed. They weren't curious. They weren't judgmental. They were quiet, thoughtful, even reverent. The people who had mocked her only minutes ago now looked like they were trying to shrink into the background. And for the first time, Lisa didn't. She stood fully in herself. Not just the scrubs. Not just the scar. Not just the inked falcon. But in the weight of what she'd survived. What she'd done. General Brigg placed a hand on her shoulder. It was light, respectful, but steady. It grounded her like a lifeline. Like someone telling her without words that she belonged. That her service hadn't been buried in someone else's file report or forgotten in the churn of combat stories. You're not invisible anymore, his eyes seemed to say. Lisa looked up at him, then over the crowd one last time. And no one was whispering now. No one was laughing. No one turned away. They saw her. Not the scar. Her. The hum of the terminal faded into the background as Lisa sat quietly at gate 12, her duffel at her feet and her new boarding pass. First class. Resting in her lap like a souvenir from another life. The air was calmer now. Eyes still glanced her way, but they held a different kind of weight. Not pity. Not fear. Recognition. Beside her sat General Thomas Brigg, his uniform still sharp, his posture upright even in rest. He hadn't left her side since stepping in. Now, the two of them sat not as officer and subordinate, but as something else. Two people shaped by the same war, its silence, its scars, its invisible weight. He glanced over at her, then forward again, his voice low and steady. I've kept track of the Falcon unit over the years. Every one of you. Lisa blinked, unsure how to respond. The field medics, he continued. The gunners, the engineers, the ones who got out and the ones who didn't. I made it my mission. I remember your name on the report. I remember what you did. Lisa looked down at the Falcon tattoo on her wrist. The ink had faded a bit, but the story behind it never had. Most people just forget us once we're out, she said. Not me, he said. She hesitated before asking. You read the reports? He gave a small nod. All of them. But yours got sent higher. Lisa turned her head slowly, curiosity flickering beneath her calm exterior. Higher. He met her eyes. The Pentagon. A pause. The president read it, he added. Your field report. Lisa's breath caught. She hadn't expected that. Not once in all these years. She thought her name had been buried in some after-action folder, filed and forgotten behind glass doors she'd never be invited through. You're kidding, she whispered. Brigg's smile was faint but real. No. I saw the signature. They asked for your service record. Your photo. They even wanted to know what hospital you worked at after the war. Lisa looked down again. The air seemed to thicken around her. All these years, she said quietly. And I thought I was just another burned-out nurse in blue scrubs, patching people up in silence. Brigg shook his head. You carried 2 Marines out of a fire with bullets flying. You shielded a wounded boy during an ambush. You didn't ask for backup. You didn't wait for orders. You acted. Lisa shrugged, her voice soft. I was just doing my job. The general looked at her. That's what makes you different. She didn't know what to say. Her throat felt tight, but not in the same way it had earlier that morning when people stared at her scar like it was a warning sign. This time it was different. She turned her gaze across the terminal. The same couple who had whispered earlier now avoided eye contact. The teenager from before sat silently, scrolling through his phone with a sheepish look on his face. But others, an older man in a veteran's cap, a mother with a toddler in her arms, watched her with something close to reverence. She was no longer just the woman with the scar. She was the nurse from Kabusa, the medic from Falcon Unit, the one who went in alone. She was seen now. Brigg followed her gaze. You changed this room just by being in it. I didn't say anything, she replied. You didn't have to. Lisa leaned back slightly in the chair. She thought of the long nights in the hospital back home, the quiet patients who came in broken and left stitched, the staff who gave her space but never asked questions. She thought of all the times she caught her reflection and remembered flames, the ringing of mortar rounds, the weight of bloodied men in her arms. And yet here she sat, beside a 5-star general, hearing that the President of the United States had once read her report like it meant something. Like she meant something. I never expected this, she admitted. You weren't supposed to, Brigg said. People like you. You don't do it for applause. That's why you never came forward. Lisa gave him a tired smile. Maybe I didn't want to remember it all. He nodded. I understand that. She looked down at the falcon on her wrist. They said the tattoo made me look hard. Scary. They were wrong, Briggs said. It makes you unforgettable. Silence settled between them again, not uncomfortable, but full. Lisa closed her eyes briefly, then opened them to the sight of people who no longer saw a wounded stranger. They saw a protector, a survivor, a soldier in scrubs. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was remembered, and sometimes that was more than enough. The engines rumbled beneath her. Lisa sat by the window, the smooth leather of her first-class seat unfamiliar against her back. The safety announcements had ended, the aisle lights dimmed, and the quiet press of motion vibrated beneath her feet as the aircraft began its slow taxi toward the runway. Her hands rested in her lap, palms open. Sunlight beamed through the oval window, catching the edges of her skin where the burn scars curled and ran like old rivers across the backs of her hands and up the line of her forearm. They shimmered faintly, ghosts of fire, of memory, of Kabusa. She turned her wrist slightly and traced the curve of the Falcon unit tattoo. The ink had held up well. The Falcon, wings outstretched, still gripped the medical caduceus tightly in its talons, a symbol of protection, of care in chaos. Her fingers brushed it gently, almost without thought, the way someone might touch a locket with a lost photo inside. Outside, the runway stretched forward endlessly. The plane turned, nose aligning with its future. Lisa glanced through the window, watching the world pause. Just for a moment. Then the engines roared. Her seat trembled with rising speed. Her stomach fluttered, not from fear, but something quieter. Reflection. Transition. The wheels lifted from the ground, the aircraft pulling gently away from the earth, from the pavement, from the weight of everything she'd carried into the terminal that morning. The city below began to shrink, losing shape and form, until even the buildings that once towered seemed like miniature models from a toy box. The sky opened ahead, blue, boundless, forgiving. She closed her eyes. Flashes came uninvited, the sound of mortar fire, the sharp crack of a rifle from across a valley, a blood-soaked glove slipping from her grasp. Her hands had once held shattered ribs, compressed dying lungs, pulled men twice her size through fire and ruin. They had shaken uncontrollably after the second blast. They had dug through rubble to find a child's pulse. Now they rested quietly, cupped in her lap. A shadow fell across her. Lisa opened her eyes to see a flight attendant leaning toward her, smile soft, eyes full of something deeper than hospitality. Miss Hammond? She asked gently. Lisa nodded. The woman extended a small folded note. From someone on board. I was asked to give this to you once we were in the air. Lisa took it without a word. The paper felt fragile between her fingers. She opened it. Scrawled in clean block letters were just 5 words. Thank you for your service. She stared at it, heart thudding louder than the engines. Lisa turned slowly toward the front of the cabin and saw him, the teenager from the airport terminal. The same one who had laughed with his friend when he first saw her scar. The one who had held up a phone, grinning at what he didn't understand. Now, he looked at her differently. His face was flushed, lips pressed into an uncertain line. He raised one hand in a small wave, then offered the smallest, most genuine smile a person could give. It wasn't smug. It wasn't performative. It was apology, gratitude, humility. Lisa stared for a moment, surprised by the weight of emotion she felt. Then, slowly, she nodded. Her lips curved slightly, not into a smile, but into something better. Recognition. The boy looked relieved, then turned forward again, shoulders eased. Lisa held the note between her fingers, rereading the words. There was no name, no flourish, just the truth. She tucked the paper into the small pocket of her seat back in front of her, unsure if she would want to keep it or simply remember it. Outside the window, the clouds thickened and scattered like cotton pulled across a blue canvas. The city was gone now. Gone were the whisperers, the stares, the suspicion. She breathed in deeply, the cabin air oddly clean. The scent of coffee, recycled air, and subtle perfume replaced the acrid sting of smoke she remembered too often. This was not just a flight. It was release. Lisa looked at her reflection in the airplane window. The faint curve of the scar on her face softened in the sunlight. It didn't look angry today. It didn't scream for attention. It just was. A mark of something real. A reminder. She wasn't just a nurse in blue scrubs. She was the medic who went in alone. She was the voice on the radio yelling for extraction. She was the one who stayed when others ran. She was the hands that never stopped working, even when her own skin blistered. And finally, she was seen. Not just by the boy, not just by General Brink, but by the world around her. And, perhaps most importantly, by herself. Lisa let her head fall gently back against the seat. Her eyes closed again, but this time not from exhaustion, from peace. The kind that came from knowing the worst days hadn't erased her. The kind that came from no longer needing to explain her scars to people who had never seen fire. She remembered the faces of those she had saved. Their eyes, their pain, their gratitude. And she remembered the ones who never made it home, whose dog tags she had gathered, whose hands she had held until their pulses stopped. The world only ever sees medals, but she had carried the cost. And now, in a quiet seat above the clouds, she let the weight fall away. She was airborne, in every way that mattered. If you enjoyed Lisa's powerful journey and how General Brink stood up for her, please like, share, and subscribe for more real, emotional stories. Tell us in the comments what you felt about Lisa, General Brink, and how it all ended. How would you rate this story on a scale of 1 to 10? Drop your rating and let us know where you're watching from. Your feedback helps us keep sharing stories that matter.